Okay, you guys, we are going to be painting Agate Geodes. I think that's how you pronounce it. So what I love about these is that they're imperfect. I also love that they have jewel tones, that they sort of are in somewhat of a pattern, but not really. And they really work really well for watercolor. And the other thing that I really love is you don't really have to draw out your stone. We're just gonna go at it, all right? We're just gonna go on our paper. So I do have a couple of supplies I wanna talk about. So I do have watercolor paper with me. It's just a little bit thicker than some sketchbook papers, but your sketchbook paper actually might be thicker than this, which is nice. The thicker the paper, the little bit better it'll work. Now, not cardstock, because cardstock is too smooth. So watercolor paper has something called a tooth in it, and it has like more texture to it so that the water can sit on top of it and that it's easy to blend. So you don't necessarily want that kind of stuff, but if you have really good sketchbook paper that that is a little bit thicker, that's awesome. I have brushes. I have a big one and a small one, just in case. And then I've got my watercolors. I actually just washed this out, even though I know it's still messy, because I will be mixing colors in my lid, which I do all of the time. I'm actually gonna be using green, like this teal color. We'll mix some black into it probably as well. And then I'm gonna be using a little bit of some blues in here, maybe some browns. But realistically, you only really need like 2 colors, maybe a couple bit more. And then I have a water cup off to the side, and I always have, oh, it's under my water cup. I always have paper towel in case I need to dry my brush off or anything along those lines. But those are the supplies you need. Pretty much just watercolor and paintbrushes and water. I mean, yeah, and a piece of paper, of course. All right. So the first thing we are going to do is we're gonna start from the corner and go up this way. Now we'll go back and forth a couple times depending on how you want it to look. That's the direction we're going to go. And we're gonna have bigger sections that'll lend itself. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna make this first little ridge here, and I'm gonna put my paintbrush into water, and I'm just going to come in here and make this big section. All right, so I want a good chunk of water on my page, so you may have to go over it a couple of times. And we're just adding water down, nothing too fancy or spectacular. I'm gonna grab a little bit of my color here, and then what you do is you go on the edge, on this top edge, and sort of just dab your brush and add color. There we go. I need a little bit more pigment on my brush. So as I do this, it should spread automatically. I'm making a mess on my page. Do you see that? So be careful, because the more water you have on your brush and the more you flick it up, sometimes you'll get those marks. So it's not the end of the world, but you definitely want to try to avoid that a little bit better than I did. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to take a little bit of blue now, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of blue on the end, on the inside here. And that will blend up with the teal a little bit. I'm just gonna come in here and add a little bit more in here and move the water around, move the color. I don't have much color on my brush or else you would see it. But just sort of move things around, and I want that to blend in. And what I'm gonna do is I'll come back when it's a little bit drier, and I'll make it a little bit darker in here. But right now, if I were to add it in while it's wet, it's just gonna blend, and I don't want that. I want these different imperfections. I really want the darks over here and the lights over here. I want it to be organic. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to make another row, like a pretty thick one, but I want to make sure I keep a white line in between my next sections. So I'm gonna take my brush and go next to it, and it's pretty close. Got that spot there. And it's pretty close, but oh, see what I did? I accidentally got too close. That's okay, not a big deal. So I'm gonna come back on top here, and I'm adding it to be thicker. You can see that I'm adding it thicker because it's spreading on this side. All right, so I really didn't add a shape there, so I'm gonna come back on this pass and add a shape to my piece. And I like it. I think I might be making it a little too wavy, but that's okay. Making sure my water goes to my edge, making sure I have a good amount of water, and then I'm gonna come back in here with my teal color and start adding in. And you see how it just spreads and it just organically moves through the page. And it's okay to have bigger areas of color and lighter areas because you want it to have those different inflections, those different tones. So I'm gonna come in here with my blue again and come from the bottom here. Sort of wiping off my brush to get some of that pigment off because I don't want it. I'm just gonna sort of let it move a little bit. I'm gonna take some of this teal off. I want it to be a little bit lighter over here, so I just can take a brush that doesn't have any pigment or water on it and sort of just suck some of it up. I'm just moving it around, trying to not mess with it too much because I do want that organic feel to it, but I do want a little bit of, I don't want it to be super white in between. And like I said, it's okay that it smooshed together there. It actually looks pretty cool with the teal underneath there. And then that's all we're gonna do for this chunk, and we're gonna make another one. So I'm not ever really like fully washing my brush off. My water is dirty, so it's okay, because it's okay if I get a little teal water color on the page because I'm putting teal on top, right? So again, we're coming around close to the edge here, trying not to get it on, but if it does, like, no big deal, like it did before for me. And you might have to get a little bit more water every once in a while to make sure that we've got that nice water. We just want like sitting water on our page. And again, then coming in here and adding more water in here. This sort of becomes the easier part because we're just putting water down on the page. So I'm making it pretty thick, a little bit thicker than than this one here. So now with this pass, I'm gonna start to make my edge here. And sometimes you may have to move your paper to see where your water's at. So coming in with my teal, adding it on, again, letting it organically spread. I'm just making a mess everywhere, aren't I? I'm gonna come in and I have a little bit of tint on my brush. I'm gonna add a little bit in here, into this area here, just sort of moving the water around, not really messing with it too much. You can see my brush is going in some crazy motions. And then I'm gonna come in here with blue, and this time I'm not gonna add it everywhere. I'm just gonna add it in some areas because the stones don't have like, they're not perfect everywhere, right? So it's okay. Man, it blended in right there again, didn't it? So it's okay if like you have areas that look a little bit different, and I like to sometimes bring up, need a little bit more water, bring up that color into here because they are not just going to stay on the edges, you know. So bringing it up in here, making it look really organic and different. All right, so we're going to do another big one right here, another big pass. So just sort of getting a little bit of pigment off of my brush here. roll up my sleeve so I don't get it in any paint. I wore the wrong shirt today because it has sleeves that are really get in the way. So again, keeping that white line in between, and that white separation really helps us to make the geode spots, but also helps it so that things don't blend together. Obviously, sometimes I have issues with that, and that's okay. I think it's the amount of the water and the way that the paper is sort of folding because of the amount of water on here, and you will see that your paper is going to bend and move, and that's okay. It actually sort of helps with the geode part because then it gives the water like motion to move. So I'm really we're making a really big thick spot here. So I'm just going to come back in and sort of define my edge. And then, oops, I got the wrong color. Not paying attention very well. So coming in with my teal again. Going along the edge here. So it looks like I need a little bit more pigment down on this end here. Get some darker areas in. So we are going to come back, like I said, and add some darker areas. I'm just sort of waiting for it to dry because we have added a ton of water on, and if I come back in, like I can see this is starting to dry, which is nice and great for what we want. Just sort of coming in here and taking some of that pigment off, so I can mess and move the water around, make some areas a little bit lighter if I think that they're to have too much of the same value there, too much teal. And I can come back in with this blue and add it in, put a little bit more water on my brush so it'll help it spread a little bit. So as you can see, if you look at the bottom here, it does dry a little bit lighter, so that's why we want to come back and add a little bit of more pigment to it, because we want it to be darker in some areas. So I'm going to come back because this area is a little bit drier, and I'm going to come back with my teal here, and I'm not going to have too much water on my brush. I need a little bit more, and make this like a darker area here. Come in here and just sort of putting a little bit more pigment on, not too much, and again trying to do it organically. We don't want to mess with the beautifulness of the automatic like blending from the water and stuff. So you may have to get a little bit more water and put it down on your paper. But just coming in here, because we really want these areas on the top to be separated and defined from each other, but done in like not with lines in an organic way. We're gonna probably mix a dark turquoise here soon, just so that we can get a little bit more depth into what we have. So I'm gonna move some of this down here, put a little bit more water on my paintbrush. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of water to help put a little bit of stuff on your page. You don't really need any more pigment on your brush. So I'm really loving like these areas here where it's really, really dark and you can see, you know, I don't want to mess with those too much because I just love them so much. So this last section is going to be one of our thicker sections, and it's going to be a little bit lighter. And then I'm thinking we might add a little bit of brown, because the outer section of a geode is a little bit more stone instead of all of the beautiful jewel colors instead of the crystals on the inside. So we want to make sure that we have it looking a little bit more realistic in that respect. So I'm just, again, adding water. Probably should have stopped and add a little bit more water on some of these here. So this is going to be a really thick section, so I'm just adding a bunch of water on the outside right now. Sometimes it's nice even to have dirty water because then you can see where you're going and you see where you have your stuff. So I'm gonna bring in some teals here and add this in to my edges. So make sure your color, because sometimes the water will pool on the edge, make sure your color goes all the way to the edge here. Like sometimes it's okay, like there's too many bumps here that I have, and I like the imperfections, but it gets to the point where looking a little bit too bumpy and controlled. So I'm gonna get a brown here. I'm actually gonna mix it in my top with some yellow. My yellow has a little bit of green in it, but that's okay. So I'm gonna test it out on another sheet of paper. So I'm gonna go back to this sheet here. I'm gonna test it out. So this brown is like, has like a little bit of a purpley undertone to it. Let's see here. That's not too bad. So I am gonna come in here, and I don't want it to be like super bright, but I am gonna come in here and add some of this in here, some of this rock tone in here. And I am gonna bring it, I'm actually gonna move this a little bit more than what we've done in the other ones. I am gonna bring it, I want it up on top here. So I want it to be layered in here so it has that, and even on top here, to give it that depth, to come in here and make it look like it's more of the stone. I probably, honestly, should have not have put so much of this teal on here on the top part so that it had that more stone effect. And you can see since I went on top of it, some of this color is getting a little bit to have a little bit of teal in that, and that's okay. It's okay. I actually really love this color that I made, so I'm gonna come in here and add it to some other areas that I have. And remember, it's gonna dry a little bit darker, so I actually need to make a little bit more because I know I've added a lot of water to it, so the pigment is running out. And again, since I made more, I'm gonna come back and see, did I make it close enough? Yeah. I'm gonna come in here and in some of these areas and add some of this brown color, because it does, in your stones, there are areas where it has this color in there. So sort of just organically, like dabbing places, I might need to come in and get a little bit more water so it starts to spread on its own, because I don't want it to look like I came in here and like sorry, I lost my train of thought because I was painting, but I want it to look like I came in here. I want it to have this really organic feel to it. So I'm looking around and it's like I need it to be a little bit darker here. A little bit more blue on the outside edges here. So just now you're at the point where you're coming around and sort of looking like, where do I want to add a little bit more color, a little bit more pigment maybe, maybe a little bit more water in some areas to get it to, if I put something in there to get it to sort of blend and smooth out, you know, those kinds of things. What are you gonna do? So now that we have some of these darker areas, I'm gonna mix that color again. So I want to make some really dark highlights in here. So I'm actually gonna take my teal, need a little bit more color, and put it in like another section. And you might not have like sections like this, but you can just put it next to it, because if those blend, it's not a big deal. And I'm gonna actually mix some of this brown in here and some of the yellow. See, my yellow's getting really dirty, because that's the colors I used. And actually I used a little bit of this reddish brown, because that brown had that weird purple undertone. And then I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna add some black. Now I have not put water in my black yet, so it needs a little bit of mixing. Because I really want some dark areas here. Maybe a little bit more teal. Man, this black needs to get more black. Here, let's test it out. There we go, it's pretty dark. So I'm actually gonna come in and I'm gonna add more water to my brush. I'm gonna come in here, and this area needs to be pretty dark. So I'm just sort of dabbing it, and we're gonna come back. I'm gonna add some teals on top here. But now what I wanna do is I wanna come in and add some darker areas. I'm actually gonna use my smaller brush. So using my smaller brush and sort of just coming in here and adding some areas, and hoping, and not everywhere, because you don't want it to look like you outlined it, but hoping that there's still some water left so that it sort of blends in. And if we need to, we can come back in. Like, I know this is pretty dry over here, so it's not gonna blend. So I'm gonna come back here in a second and get some teal on my brush and blend it out. I don't want it to be black, and it looks weird now, but we're gonna add a really thick black border up on the top here, so it's not gonna look too bad once we get that other black in. There'll be somewhere else where there's black, and we'll get it to blend. So we don't want to add this everywhere, but it's okay to have long areas, and we don't want it to be like, it looks like I'm doing this a little too like on top of each other, see? So I need to come in and make sure that I keep it organic. Sometimes I have, sometimes I'll come in and make things look like a pattern, right? Because look, it's right here, it's right there, it's right there. So I, at times, and this is, we're gonna add a little bit more black here. I at times will have to come in and fix it to make it not so patterny and perfect. Because we don't want that. We want it to look, we want that organic feel to it. So since there's water up here still and it hasn't dried, it works really well in the blending. So I'm gonna come in with a little bit of teal, and I'm dabbing a little bit into that black there. I'm gonna bring it all the way down. But having a little bit of teal in this color will help blend it a little bit more, especially up here where it's a little bit wet. And it's okay to ask those colors to sort of come down in here a little bit. We don't want to get too much because we want that earthy tone, which it looks like I might have to come back in here for. But I'm gonna come back in on this, and I've got a lot of water on my brush because I'm trying to not add too much more color to it, but really make this color blend in. So I do have a little bit of color on my brush, but not a lot. And you want to do this somewhat quickly so that the lines that you made don't dry completely. Looks like some of mine did already. So we're gonna have to move a little bit faster, try to get this to blend out. But as we're doing this, you can see how the layering and adding this water and a little bit of pigment on my brush is helping to make this come a little alive. It's really helping to make those areas have a little bit more depth to them, you know, making it's lovely when the area is still wet, because then it blends so much nicer. But even if we have some areas that have some harsh lines, it's okay. Because if you look at a stone, if you look at some of these stones, they do have areas that have some really harsh lines in them. Our goal is just to make it look as organic as possible and not perfect. So sometimes that means adding more water. Like I have a lot of water on my brush with a little bit of pigment to try to get this to blend in a little bit more. So I'm gonna get some teal and put this on top here. I'm gonna take a little bit of blue actually and put it down here too. Ooh, that was too much. Wow. So if I wash my brush off and just sort of push the color around. And the other thing I'm doing is I'm taking it, you can see me doing this, and then I'm wiping my paintbrush on my paper towel, and that's taking some of that blue out. That looks better, holy moly. So I do want it to be a little bit more defined. We're gonna come back in a little bit and add a little bit of black in there as well. So I'm gonna go back to my big brush, and I'm gonna go to my black. And we are gonna make a really thick black border, because on the outside of our geode, there's typically a really big, thick black border, and it's not perfect, and it's jaggedy and rough, so we wanna make sure that we have that look. So this is where you're gonna add a lot of black in here. Add a little bit more water to my brush. I don't have too much water, and I haven't added like water on my paper because I want this to be really nice and dark. And I am gonna keep a line in between that we will sort of blend out. Oops, oh well. So this black actually has a little bit of like a greenish undertone. It's not that pure black, and that's okay. It goes along with what we have. But you can see now, I'm gonna come back in here and add a little bit more black on the bottom, but you can see now how having some of these darker areas isn't a bad thing, because we've got that really big black border on here. And you can come back in and add a little bit more, because again, everything dries a little bit lighter. So coming back in and just adding these little bit of a darker areas, and I'm gonna have to come back in and add a little bit more water to them like I did the first time, but that's okay. That's what watercolor is about, is being able to layer and starting off lightly and getting dark. You can't really lighten it up too much, so that's why if we start off lighter, we can always come back in and make it a little bit darker to give it that depth and that feel that we want. Oops. And you guys can see how many times I've messed up today, and it's still okay. I forgot, I'm gonna come back in with this color in here and get a little bit darker, some darker tones in here. Especially down here. So just coming in and doing these little areas. You know, now you're in the stage where, again, like we did before the black, is how dark do you want it? Do you want to add any other tones to it? So I'm going to come back in and try to add another layer of black here. To make it a little, try to get it really, really nice and dark and rich. So that means that I don't need as much water on my paint palette, and I need more pigment on my brush to get it to be nice and dark and black. And that, my friends, unless you want to add more, is how you make a geode. Now, there are some people who don't like these white lines, so I would suggest taking your main color, so taking my teal and adding a ton of water to it. Ton of water to it. Because what you would want to do, and again, I'm going to test out. So you want it like that light. What you can do is come in here and just sort of make it so that it's not white, but you still want that separation. So it's okay, you have to be careful though, because if it's a little wet, you'll get some bleeding, which isn't bad, but you do want these areas of white to help define. I guess they don't have to be white, but you want these areas to help define the different layers of the geode. So I actually like mine to have a little bit of pigment on them. You may like it really white. It's completely up to you. I like that look of, it not being pure white. And I have to be very careful because I know this black is wet, so I can't get too close to it, trying to stay towards the bottom part here. So that for me looks a little bit better than those pure whites, and it did blend. I should have waited till it was drier and like come in here, but I just wanted to show you that. So that, my friends, is how you paint a geode. So you see, and sorry if I cut off some of it. Sometimes I'm not good at making sure that it's all the way in the camera, but you can see over here what I did and how I brought it up onto the top here. But yeah, that's our geode. All right, so I came back in and I wanted to show you. I came back in and added some darker areas to sort of connect the two so that it looked a little too black when I was taking a look at it. So you can come back always and add those in, but I just wanted to connect with you and tell you that that's what I did. So I came back in and sort of added those darker areas to sort of blend in here with this black area. And actually, I think I might take this black and sort of blend it down a little bit. I don't know, I don't like that line right there. So if I do that, actually I am gonna do that. I'll come back and talk to you. Okay, so I did come back in quickly and add some black into this because after looking at pictures, let me get it here. After looking at pictures, there's not a really big separation between the really dark. If we, here, we'll go over here. If we look at this one in particular, between the dark and the color, there's not that big separation. So I was looking at these pictures and thinking, man, I did not like how mine looked. So, and you may like how yours look. You don't have to add that black coming down into it, but I like that look. And then what I also did is I came in and I made some of these areas a little bit darker, just to help pull everything together and define it. But I do have these lighter areas still because we want to be able to see the difference in our layers. And I know this looks different right now. It needs to dry, or I maybe need to add another layer on here, but I am one of those people who come back and take a second and like go walk away and come back and look at it and say, okay, what maybe can I change or fix? So that's why after thinking about it, I'm like, I don't like how this looked and how it was separated. So I came back in and fixed that. I came back and add a little bit of darker things. So there's always things that you can change, or maybe things that you're unhappy about, but you have to know when to stop, because sometimes the more you work it and the more stuff you add on, it doesn't look good. So I'm gonna stop right now. Like, I've added that in. The only thing that I would go back in is once this is dry is I would try to see if I could get that line to disappear. So that is the only thing I would come back and rework. Other than that, everything is done, because if I add too much more, I'm gonna make it muddy and it's not gonna look good. So, but I wanted to come back and let you guys see what I had done because I wasn't liking how it looked. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have success with this, and it may take a couple tries. This wasn't my first try, so it might take a little bit.